Hi, welcome to another batch of classic bookmarks. A couple of years ago, we realized that we had been producing Bookmark for 30 years, some 425 episodes. To celebrate, we chose 15 shows to enhance and broadcast. The reception has been terrific. Viewers got a real kick out of seeing or re-seeing the conversations with Toni Morrison, Ray Bradbury, William Styron, Alexander McCall Smith, and many others. So, we have chosen another 15 shows from the archives. Interviews with George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, E.O. Wilson, Walter Mosley, Albert Murray, James Haskins, and 9 others. Of course, we are continuing to produce new shows with new writers and old writer friends. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoy watching these classics as much as we enjoyed making them.
The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is celebrated, distinguished, and prolific Canadian author Margaret Atwood. Miss Atwood is the author of some 40 volumes of work, including 14 novels, 15 volumes of poetry, 8 children's books, and 10 volumes of nonfiction. She has won the prestigious Booker Prize, the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and more than 50 other literary prizes. Recently, the adaptation of her novel, The Handmaid's Tale, has been a television sensation, winning 6 Emmys, including Outstanding Drama Series. I spoke with Margaret Atwood in front of a live audience in Studio A in the Digital Media Center of the University of Alabama. Atwood, it's nice to see you.
Lovely to see you again.
You're having a very, very busy time here in your short visit to Tuscaloosa, so I appreciate that you can take time and sit and talk. And I should say, welcome back.
Thank you.
You were here in 1985, quite a while ago.
A little while ago.
Have you had a chance to walk around, look around at all, to see
a
how
lot
different
bigger.
it is?
It got a lot bigger. And apparently they're making an old lunatic asylum into a fancy place for poets? What?
Performing arts.
Reforming? Oh, performing.
When the book, Handmaid's Tale, all the American editions all say 1986, but it's really 1985.
Yeah, so Canada 1985. In those days before the internet, we could have different publishing seasons. So UK and US was 1986 in the spring. Canada was fall 85.
Right. What everyone here wants and can't have is that you wrote that book while you were on campus.
Well,
here.
I did. I finished
How
it
much?
here.
What was the story there?
Yeah, well, I finished the book, and in those days they had just invented the fax machine.
Ah.
Ooh. Okay, this is before there were any lattes. There were no lattes yet, except in Italy. They had not yet been deployed the way they have now. So the fax machine had been invented, and there was a place where you could go. It was a copy shop of some kind. And I would write my pages, and I would type them. I'm a very bad typist. And I would take them to the fax place and fax them to my typist, which I thought was magic. And then she would produce these beautifully typed pages. So I was running around back and forth. I had a typewriter here, which I was typing my manuscript on. And do you remember this? Probably nobody does. There were little bottles of white stuff.
Oh, yes.
A little brush. And there were also, if you wanted to be very fancy, there were little white tapes that you could type on and then stick that on.
Yeah.
So my pages looked like that. But I did finish the book here, and I gave it to somebody I was co-teaching, who was also teaching here, called Valerie Martin.
Yes.
Yeah, so Valerie
Poet.
was here. She was a novelist.
Yeah.
She later went on to write this book called Property, which won the English Orange Prize. And she became a friend of mine, and we have remained friends ever since. And she is the first person who read the manuscript.
Oh. Wonderful.
And-
So it was written
and
here.
It was, yeah.
How
So
nice.
I recall saying, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. And she recalls saying, I think you're going to make a lot of money. That's what she remembers saying. She is from New Orleans, so she had a somewhat different view.
Well, the book was a success. Then there was a stage play, a 1990 feature film, an opera, a ballet, a one-woman show.
Was there? I don't remember that one.
There, one way or another,
One way or
a
another.
lot of people
yeah.
make a lot of money.
Yeah, it's now being a graphic novel,
Oh, right.
which,
of course.
of course, yes, that's been a while in the making because the artist is hand painting each panel.
Oh,
It's going to be beautiful, but it's taking a bit long. So the ballet was one of the oddest incarnations. The opera is actually very good. And I think one of the reasons was that the opera has a convention that you can be standing on the stage singing at the top of your lungs
Sure.
and nobody else can hear you. Nobody on the stage. We're all pretending we can't hear. So you can do monologues, you can do like Shakespeare soliloquies
yeah.
with an
Yeah.
opera, which is hard to do with a film, but
Right.
the TV series uses voiceover, I think
Quite a lot,
appropriately.
yeah. Over the years, talking with writers, novelists especially, some want their books to be made into movies, some don't. Some have had their books made into movies and they love it. Pat Conroy was very lucky in this regard, and he liked the movies. Other people have had their films made and hated it. Hulu has done the first 10 episodes. I've watched them. They're very painful, a lot of it, very painful. What is your, two parts, what was your involvement with the Hulu production? And, I mean, I could quote some chapter and verse on changes, things that are there that weren't in the novel
Yeah.
and so on. And about the differences between, first of all, what was your involvement? And then how do you think about it?
Okay, so here's the story.
Yeah.
I started screenwriting in about 1970. So I had about a decade in which I was writing film and television script, so I know what the problems are. I know that a novel is not a film. I know that you can do things with a novel that it's very hard to do with film and vice versa. Handmaid's Tale got made into a film in 89, 90.
Yeah.
And Harold Pinter was the screenwriter. So I was a reader on that, and I, corrected the Englishisms, such as we don't say hand cream, we say hand lotion, things like that. And Volker Schlorndorff, who made The Tin Drum, was the director. So it was the moment in world history in which the United States was a beacon of light and democracy and freedom and all of those things. And Volker Schlorndorff was from Germany. And I think essentially he didn't believe. In fact, I just had a conversation with him. I was in Germany and had a phone conversation. He said, I didn't really believe it back in 1989. So he didn't really quite believe it. And he took out the voiceover that Harold Pinter had written in. So the actress, whose name was Natasha Richardson,
Right.
whom I had met when she was 11, and I was working with Tony Richardson on a film script. These are long, involved stories. She had recorded she had acted against her own voiceover. And when you took it out, it made her performance look rather flat. Anyway, so that all happened. We launched it in Germany, in West Berlin, and the wall had just come down. So then we went across and showed it in East Berlin. And those two experiences were very different. So West Berlin, it was all about the direction and the aesthetics and all those things that people talk about. And in East Berlin, they watched it like this. And then they said, this was our life. They didn't mean the costumes. They meant the inability to trust anybody.
Right.
You didn't know who was spying on you.
Complete cultural paranoia.
It wasn't paranoia. Paranoia is when what you're afraid of isn't true. This was all true. Because I had lived there in 84, and I had gone to East Germany, I'd gone to Czechoslovakia, I'd gone to Poland. And in order to talk to people, you really had to go out into the middle of a field because they just knew everything was bugged. Unlike today, Okay, so then the film rights, the television rights were attached to that film contract. And it then went into a deep, dark labyrinth where nobody could actually figure out who owned them, because they kept being sold on to this and that. And we kept getting offers, but it was impossible to do anything because we didn't know who owned the rights. So finally some detective went down into the mines and found out that they were somewhere in the vaults of MGM, who were, I suppose, rather surprised to discover this. But then they got together with Hulu. So this wasn't my deal. It was something that happened because the TV rights had disappeared and then reappeared. I was involved as a consultant, but I had no actual control, and writers usually don't, and you'd have to be mad to give them any control, because imagine spending all that money and then having them say, you know, I don't like that tie, I'm canceling the show. Which
Writers
could
that
happen.
cranky, are they?
They can be a bit cranky. Yeah, they can be. But luckily, the person who ended up being the showrunner is a pretty smart guy called Bruce Miller. And we discussed all of these changes, and he always had them reasoned out pretty thoroughly. So that is the rule also that he's following for Series 2. And the main rule is nothing goes in that doesn't have a precedent in real life. You know, you have to be able to show that this is something human beings have done.
Let me take that up. Many of your interviews, going all the way back to the publication of the novel, when it won the Arthur C. Clarke Award and was discussed as a science fiction novel. I cannot tell you, well, I can't tell you, and maybe you can't tell me either, how many times people have discussed, called it a science fiction novel, and you have explained why it's not exactly, or you've discussed the question, and I'd like to hear it again now.
Okay.
You want it to be speculative
I believe
fiction.
in truth in advertising.
Right.
If it says bran flakes on the box, I want there to be bran flakes inside the box. And science fiction, which is a term that didn't exist back when War of the Worlds was written, or when Jules Verne was writing his kind of science fiction, and those are two different kinds. So Jules Verne was writing books about stuff he thought really could happen, or was on the verge of happening, and H.G. Wells was writing about canisters full of tentacled Martians hitting the Earth. And I've read extensively in both kinds. There is a difference. And I simply want to honor that difference. So 1984 is a different kind of thing from Star Wars.
Absolutely.
So if it says science fiction on the outside, I expect there to be another planet, somewhere we haven't been, some form of space transport or something.
Or time transport.
Or time transport, or in a galaxy far, far away and in another time. You know, I expect that, and I like reading that, but I cannot write that. I'm not good at it. It's not part of my skill set. So the Jules Verne, his line of descent goes through Aldous Huxley and Orwell, and H.G. Wells, his line of descent then goes all the way to Star Wars. And I'm in the Jules Verne category, not by choice. I would love to be able to write about other planets and
bug-eyed monsters, all of that.
My stuff. I grew up with it.
Yeah.
But I can't do it.
In the novel, in The Handmaid's Tale, a whole lot of terrible things happen to women.
And men.
And men. And
it's a totalitarianism.
I understand it to be your position, though, that there's nothing that happens to people in the novel that hasn't happened
done
somewhere to somebody.
Somewhere, in some place, at some time. That was my rule for writing it. And I can give you chapter and verse, because I was quite meticulous about that.
The effect of it, though, is that a whole lot of bad things gathered up over several centuries from several different cultures all happen at once in the novel.
That's what happens with the totalitarianisms. But I also carefully placed it in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which right now prides itself on being the home of liberal democracy, but started as a 17th century Puritan theological seminary. So different times, things change. And having been born in 1939, a significant year, what happened in that year? Could it have been that World War II started? Yes, it could. Being Canadian, of course, Canada was in it in 1939. So I've always been interested in totalitarianisms of all kinds. And that is what they do. They tend to gather together all these kinds of things and do them all at once.
There's a confluence in this novel. In order for the totalitarian uprising to succeed, these conditions have to be fraught. The country has to be in
That's generally what happens.
A state of high anxiety, a real mess, which results in...
Or people have to think it's a real mess, one or the other, or both.
In this case, though, sterility, widespread lack of reproduction.
That's happening.
Is a part of it.
Yeah.
Radioactivity.
Yeah. Well, it was a mistake to put an atomic generating plant on the San Andreas Fault, in my humble opinion. It's
going to be one day a mistake anyway.
Not a choice I personally would have made, but what do I know?
I remember, and I'm sure that millions of people did this. In January of 1984, I read 1984 again, and I thought, we're not doing too badly, really. I mean, compared to what's in the book, things are all right. The time setting of The Handmaid's Tale has sort of passed, or we're in it. How are we doing? How are we doing? Are you going to give our culture a grade on the degree to which we have fulfilled the horrible possibilities of The Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah, we've got all kinds of other horrible possibilities surrounding us at the moment. We do not lack for horrible possibilities, but for the second half of the 20th century, it seemed to be a race between 1984 and Brave New World. Right. With some wags suggesting that we might get both at once, which seems to be, we seem to be drifting towards that. We seem to be drifting towards a surveillance state,
right,
which is, however, somewhat invisible. Like we don't see we don't need the kind of Hitlerian marches and jackboots and things, or at least we used to think we didn't need them. Some people now think we need them again. So we may be actually indeed getting something that's a bit like both at once. It does seem to be a general rule that once institutions get power, they have a lot of trouble relinquishing it. But that's a people thing, is it not? So how are we doing? Well, my clippings file, which I was digging around in just recently because this guy at the BBC was making a documentary, so we went to the Fisher Rare Books Library where the box of clippings, I used to cut them out and paste them, as one did, instead of just making digital copies. That's why it's called cut and paste. So they're all in there, and I was cutting them out and pasting them. And people were talking in 1985 about what they would like to do if they got the power in this country. And they were talking about that, but they were not yet doing it. And now they're doing it in a lot of places. So you are seeing, things move this way, then they move that way, then they move this way. It goes back and forth in history. And there's no rule that says that there's a one-way arrow that always only ever goes one way. That's just not true.
There's a line in the novel, this is a happier thought. Well, I don't know if it's a happier thought or not, but in any case, it's a different thought. People in your novel, and I think this carries right through the Hulu series, one of the problems, along with pollution and fascism and cruelty, is a lack of love. explicitly, that one of the people are dying for a lack of not just romance, but love.
Well, this is the problem in a society in which you don't know who to trust.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to actually have the kind of love that people are dying for, you have to be able to trust another person enough. And in a totalitarianism, that is always open to question. I shouldn't even say just in a totalitarianism. There was a case in England just recently in which somebody infiltrated an environmental movement. A guy who was an undercover spy made a romantic relationship with one of these environmental women, carried on a relationship with her for about 4 years, and then lo and behold, he wasn't who she thought he was. You know, imagine how damaging that would be.
Who was he?
He was a spy
For
corporations trying to get stuff on these environmental workers. But I think there's a lot more of that goes on than we would like to believe in our society. But we have no problem believing it about, you know, former USSR countries, where it was endemic. You just never knew who you were dealing with.
Yeah.
One of my friends, as a young man, he's an English man, was parachuted behind the lines in World War II and worked with the French resistance. And
Right.
he was English. His job was to interview the people who were downed British airmen being rescued by the resistance and passed from person to person. And he had to interview them to make sure they weren't German plants, because a lot of Germans at that time had been to school in England,
Sure.
right? So they might be posing as British airmen to find out
The Underground Railroad.
where the
Sure.
Underground Railway was.
Yeah.
And if he would ask them things like cricket scores and in pubs and things like that. And if he caught one of them out, the resistance would just take that person out and shoot them.
Yes.
So that is the problem. Who can you trust? And that is a sort of universal human thing. Who can you trust? It just becomes very exacerbated in a totalitarianism.
The feminist dimension, so to speak, there's a lot of varieties of feminism in the novel and in the series, but one of the things that caught my attention was a tension, which I don't think finally gets thoroughly solved. When June and the others are reminiscing, they're reminiscing about a time in the near past when they had freedom, and they could dress as they pleased, and they could wear makeup, and they could
have lattes.
They could have lattes. They could have male and female lovers. They could have any. They were free, but they were also the victims of a certain amount of harassment, assault, and rape. But they had the freedom, and then Aunt Lydia and the
that's
others.
different from what?
Well, no, but then Aunt Lydia and the
Real
others
life,
say,
no.
"Well, you're safe now.
Yes.
Now there will be no more assault, harassment, rape, because now we have all that solved." Except June and the other ofs.
Yes.
I think they some of them buy it, but mostly not.
Okay, so what
That
do you,
is the tension
yeah,
that I'm.
yeah, of course,
that
exactly.
I'm, that
yeah,
I'm
and
identifying.
that is what people are always making choices about.
Mm-hmm.
Do I trade freedom with risk
Yes.
for safety with constrictions? You know, what do I do? And that has been a motif in human history forever. So how much do I give up in order to feel that I'm safer?
Yeah.
Or how much do I relinquish in the way of safer to go out and make what seem to me to be my own individual choices?
Right.
What is, and people analyze societies on the basis of there being I societies or we societies.
Uh-huh.
And some societies are we societies, and in we societies, one of the controls is shame, like public shame.
Right.
In I societies, one of the constraints is guilt, like personal guilt. And those are two different things. But apparently people in we societies and people in I societies even look at pictures differently. So a person in a we society will look at the picture and see the background first, all the things surrounding.
Oh.
The person in the I society will look at the picture and see the central character, and then look at the background. So it's a different way of viewing the world. So what is happening in the Handmaid's Tale is that they're trying to make people from an I society fit into a we society.
It is the most interesting use of Scrabble in all of English
so
literature.
mean, right?
I can think of no
Well, it's
other
got letters in
novel or
it, yeah.
story that features Scrabble.
Well,
that was a
yeah.
stroke. I really like it.
Okay, I have a history with Scrabble. I'm actually not very good at it, although my grandmother was a whiz. She was a whiz at it. But oddly enough, I'm not very good at Scrabble. I'm not very good at crossword puzzles. But they do both involve words, and of course written words are the big forbidden, sexy,
Right.
no-no thing in this culture. It may interest you to know that in the series, all of the paintings in the commander's house are from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts.
Oh.
And the signatures on them are the only things you can read in that house, apart from what's in the library. So I said to the people running the show, I said, did you borrow them from the museum? They said, no, we got this nice man in China to do them for us at $20
and very few could
That's what
tell
they
the
are.
difference, right?
Yeah, not in the show, but it shows that these people are like other totalitarianisms in that they loot things,
Yeah.
and the people at the top get to have them.
Right. Well, you made Scrabble rebellious.
Yeah.
You made it sexy. You made
Transgressive. Well,
it's an act of. It's like instead of giving June flowers or candy, he allows her to play a little Scrabble.
You got it. So they've done a show on YouTube, which you can see by an outfit called Funny or Die, called Finally They've Made a Handmaid's Tale for Men. And they do the Scrabble scene.
Oh.
Have a look. They give it quite a different twist. So
We have 1 minute left.
All right.
I know it's gone awfully quickly, but having published now more than 40 books.
yeah, I'm in the more than 40 point. I'm more than 40 years old. I've published more than 40 books.
Right. So I'm sure
know
there's
that.
more. What are you working on now? What will your readers be looking for in the next 6 months, year, 2 years?
I never tell that, but I'll tell you about something else, which is the Future Library of Norway project. Future
Okay.
Library of Norway, which you can find under futurelibrary.no, will last for 100 years. And a forest is growing, it will grow for 100 years, and in each of those years, a different author will submit a secret manuscript to the Future Library of Norway.
Ah.
And in the 100th year, all the boxes will be opened, and enough trees will be cut from the forest to make the paper to print the Future Library of Norway. So my very future readers can look forward to whatever is in the box that will be opened in 97 years.
That's wonderful. Ms. Atwood, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, and for me too.